Welcome in, everyone. Today we're diving into a topic that's clearly important to you: abuse in marriage. And, we're going to really try to dig into this question of should women stay in an abusive marriage?
That's a tough one, for sure.
You bet. And the source you sent is, well, it's really fascinating. We've got this conversation between a man and a woman, both dealing with, I guess, the pressures that women face in these situations, especially in Nigerian culture.
Yeah, and what I found so interesting is that it's structured almost like a public discussion, almost a podcast in itself, So we get both sides right off the bat.
It's true. Two voices, totally different perspectives. But before we even get into the cultural stuff, I think we need to define abuse, right? Because the source makes it clear we're not just talking about getting hit or anything.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something they really emphasize. It's about, understanding the damage that words and manipulation can do, belittling someone, putting them down constantly. Those wounds might not be visible, but man, they run deep.
It's like a societal blind spot almost. People dismiss it as just words. But the emotional impact, that's real. And that's where these cultural pressures come in, especially in Nigeria, as the source points out.
It's fascinating how she, the woman in the discussion, talks about the immense pressure in Nigerian culture to stay in a marriage, no matter what.
Yeah.
It's like divorce. It's a huge stigma, seen as a personal failure, especially for women.
Wow. So it's not even just about the relationship itself. There's this whole other layer of judgment. Like the source mentions elders, even friends, pushing women to just endure, even when it's clearly hurting them.
Yeah. And at what point does endurance become, self-sabotage? When does staying in a toxic environment stop being a virtue? It makes you think.
It really does. And it's interesting because even the male speaker, while he's advocating for commitment, he also talks about how men are taught to view marriage as this lifelong thing, no matter what. Yeah. Walking away, it's almost like weakness, not upholding your responsibility.
Right. And that ties into those societal expectations, right?
Right.
Like men are supposed to be stoic, tough, endure hardship without complaining. So it's almost like two sides of the same coin, right? Women are expected to endure within the marriage, and men are expected to endure the marriage itself.
And the source seems to challenge that whole idea. Like maybe true strength is recognizing when something's harmful and doing something about it. For both men and women.
Exactly. It's about being able to say, hey, this isn't working, I'm not okay. Because bottling it up, it's almost like self-destruction in a way. And, one of the things they talk about is this pressure to stay together for the kids, which is a whole other can of worms.
For sure. And they go into that too. It's this common argument, right? Stay together for the children's sake. But they really question whether, a two-parent household, even if it's unhappy, is always best for the kids.
Yeah. It's like, what are the children really being exposed to, right? If the home is filled with constant fighting, disrespect, or even worse. Like, the woman in the discussion asks this really pointed question. Is it really a home we're protecting them from if it's filled with all that negativity?
That really stuck with me. And there's research that supports this too, Studies showing that kids who grow up with domestic violence are like 6 times more likely to attempt suicide. 6 times. The source highlights that statistic. It's pretty sobering. So staying together just for the kids, maybe that's not the protection we think it is.
Right. And it makes you think about the long-term impact, the emotional baggage that kids carry from seeing that dysfunction. It raises this bigger question. How do we shift the narrative?
How do we move away from this idea that leaving a marriage, especially for a woman, is a failure? The source, it's almost like they're saying, look, it could actually be an act of self-preservation. A woman's well-being matters. Leaving a bad situation, it's not admitting defeat, it's prioritizing her health. It may be creating a healthier environment for the kids too.
Absolutely. It's recognizing your worth, your value, and understanding that, hey, you have the right to leave if it's causing harm. And what's really interesting is that the source also talks about the fears that can paralyze women in these situations. Fear of judgment, of failing, of the unknown.
It makes sense, right? Taking that leap is scary. But what did you find most striking in this conversation?
For me, it was how they really blended those personal stories with the bigger societal expectations. It wasn't just some intellectual debate. It felt so real, so raw, and incredibly relatable.
It's true. The way they use those personal stories, those anecdotes, really brings it all home.
Totally. Like, she talks about a friend, right, who put up with years of emotional abuse. And the reason, she was terrified of what people would think. Like, bringing shame on her family, facing judgment from her community.
It's heartbreaking, that someone would feel trapped like that, unable to put themselves first because of those external pressures. It makes you realize it's not just an individual struggle. It's like a whole societal issue we need to tackle.
And that's what I think this source does so well. It really opens up that conversation. It tackles those tough questions head on, like those deep-seated beliefs about marriage, divorce, what it means to be a good wife, a strong husband. It's not about tearing down traditions or anything, but it does kind of force you to look at them with fresh eyes.
For sure. It's all about questioning those assumptions, right? Like that idea that staying married no matter what is always the best choice, or that getting a divorce means you've failed somehow. This source, it's almost like they're saying, hey, maybe choosing to leave can be powerful.
I found that so refreshing. It's not about giving up, but more about recognizing your own worth, refusing to accept a relationship that diminishes you. She talks about how leaving an abusive marriage, it can actually be the way to take back your life. Set healthy boundaries. Put yourself first.
You deserve to be in a relationship that's based on respect, trust, love. And if you don't have that, you have the right to walk away. And it's interesting how they bring in the male perspective here too. The expectations on men to man up and endure any hardship without complaint.
Oh yeah, they touch on that. And they're saying that this stoicism, this idea that men should just suck it up, can actually do a lot of harm. It stops them from showing emotion, from asking for help, from acknowledging their own needs. And that can lead to some really unhealthy patterns in relationships.
They're saying it's okay to admit you're struggling, to say, hey, things aren't okay. That vulnerability, that's actually strength, not weakness. And this goes back to that whole discussion about staying together for the children, right? This source really takes that head on.
Oh, absolutely. They ask, what are those kids really being exposed to in a home where there's constant tension, And then they bring up that research showing that children who grow up around domestic violence are more likely to have problems later, emotionally, behaviorally. It's pretty heavy stuff.
And they make the point that maybe even if you're trying to protect the kids, staying in a bad marriage might actually be doing more harm than good. Yeah. It really makes you think about how deeply ingrained those societal pressures are, not just on women, but on men too.
You're right. It goes both ways. And that's why it's so important to have these open conversations, to challenge those assumptions and to create a space where everyone feels like they can prioritize their own well-being.
The source even mentions those cultural sayings, those proverbs that reinforce these beliefs. Like the male presenter, he's Nigerian, right? He brings up this Yoruba proverb, Ile labo simi oko. It means home is where we endure. It's like this ingrained belief that you just have to endure to keep your home, your family together. But the source, they push back on that. Like, is blind endurance always a good thing? Especially when it's hurting people.
It's crucial to question those long-held beliefs.
Yeah.
Are they really helping us? And I think that's what's so great about this source. It encourages us to really think for ourselves, to look at things from different angles.
So as we keep going in this deep dive, let's remember that. To be open, to challenge our own biases, and to explore all the different facets of this issue. It's not about easy answers. It's about a nuanced, thoughtful discussion.
Exactly. And realizing that there are so many factors involved, personal, societal, cultural, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
And, something we haven't really touched on yet, but that I think is super relevant here, is the role of faith, of religion.
Oh, good point. It's a big one that can really influence how people view marriage, divorce, even abuse itself.
Because let's face it, in many cultures, those religious beliefs really shape how people see these things. And sometimes they can actually be used to, justify staying in a harmful situation.
Right. That idea of, turning the other cheek or that divorce is a sin, that can put huge pressure on someone to stay when they really shouldn't.
It's such a tricky balance. How do you honor your faith while also protecting yourself?
I think it's important to remember that while faith and spirituality can offer strength and comfort, they should never be used to excuse or condone abuse. Full stop. No one should feel like they have to stay in a dangerous situation, no matter what their beliefs are.
It's about finding that balance, honoring your faith, but also recognizing that you have every right to protect yourself, to set boundaries, to seek out a healthier and safer place.
Absolutely. And sometimes, talking to a religious leader or counselor who understands these issues can be incredibly helpful.
Even though we've been discussing some pretty heavy stuff, I really appreciate that this source doesn't just leave you feeling hopeless. There's a real sense of hope, a way forward.
I agree. They highlight the resilience of women who choose to leave those abusive marriages. They celebrate that strength, that courage to break free and rebuild. And they remind us that healing is possible. that you can find happiness and fulfillment outside of a painful relationship.
It's about reclaiming that control, recognizing your worth, and refusing to settle for less than you deserve.
Yeah.
And they get down to the nitty-gritty, too. Talking about getting support, whether it's from friends, family, therapy, support groups. No one has to go through this alone.
That's so important. It's about surrounding yourself with people who can offer encouragement, guidance, just a listening ear, people who can remind you how strong you are and help you through those challenges of starting over.
And it's not just external support either. The source talks about self-care, too. Taking care of your mental and emotional health.
Which is so essential, right? Recognizing that healing takes time, that it's okay to not be okay all the time.
You don't have to be a superhero. You just have to be willing to take those first steps towards a better life.
Exactly. Give yourself permission to heal, to grieve, to work through those difficult emotions. And remember that you're worthy of love, respect, and happiness.
You know, it's been a lot to unpack in this deep dive. Cultural pressures, societal expectations, the impact on children, and even the male perspective. It is some pretty heavy stuff. But what I really appreciate about this source is, like, it doesn't just leave you feeling totally bummed out. There's a real sense of hope, you know, like a way forward.
Right. And what really stuck out to me was that emphasis on choice. Like, they don't shy away from the fear that can hold women back from leaving these marriages, but they also celebrate how much strength it takes to finally break free.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, look, we get it. It's hard, but it is possible. You can find happiness outside of that pain.
And that shift is so powerful. It's not just about being a victim. It's about being a survivor, taking control of your own life.
It's a big difference, for sure. It's not just escaping the bad stuff. It's believing that there's a brighter future out there waiting for you.
Absolutely. And they even talk about how to build that brighter future, you know, like reaching out to people, friends, family, therapists, support groups. You don't have to do this alone.
There's something to be said for having people around you, right? Just to listen, to encourage you, to guide you, especially when you're starting over.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just have to be other people. The source talks about the importance of self-care too, taking care of your mental and emotional health.
Yeah, that's so important. You have to allow yourself time to heal, to deal with the emotions, the pain. You don't have to pretend to be strong all the time.
Exactly. Give yourself permission to grieve, to work through everything you've been through, and to remember that you are worthy of love, of respect, and of being happy.
And before we finish up, you know, one thing that popped up but we didn't really dig into is the whole faith and religion aspect.
Oh yeah, that's a whole other layer, isn't it? It can be a really big influence in these situations.
Right. Because a lot of cultures, you know, religious beliefs play a huge role in how people view marriage, divorce, even what abuse is. And sometimes those beliefs can actually be used to say that staying in a bad situation is the right thing to do.
It's true. We've all heard those phrases, right? Turn the other cheek, divorce is a sin, that kind of thing. And that can be a lot of weight on someone's shoulders.
It's a tough spot to be in. How do you honor your faith but also protect yourself at the same time? It feels like a tightrope walk.
It can be. But I think it's so important to remember that while your faith can give you strength and comfort, it should never be used to excuse abuse. No matter what, no one deserves to be in a dangerous situation, no matter what their beliefs are.
Yeah, it's about finding that middle ground, right? Honoring your faith, but also understanding that you have the right to protect yourself, to set boundaries, to find a place where you feel safe and healthy.
For sure. And sometimes talking to a religious leader or a counselor who's trained in dealing with these issues can make a world of difference.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. It's been intense, but I hope it's also been helpful. I think what's really powerful about this source is that it emphasizes that abuse is never okay. No matter what form it takes, no matter who it's coming from, you deserve to be in a relationship that's based on respect, on trust, on love.
And if you are going through something like this, please remember that you're not alone. There's help out there. Whether it's a friend, family member, a therapist, a hotline, reach out to someone. There are people who care and they want to help.
And never forget, leaving an abusive relationship isn't a sign of weakness. It takes an incredible amount of strength and courage to do that. It's choosing you, choosing your well-being, and creating a life that's free from fear and pain.
This deep dive, it's just the beginning. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep putting yourself first. We hope this conversation has been enlightening and empowering. Keep the conversation going. Talk to someone you trust. Seek professional help if you need it. Remember, you're worth it.